Chapter 17, The Endocrine System, Part 1. Here's your table of contents, and we're starting part point 1. Well, let's talk about glands. Do you remember what glands are? Our skin has a lot of glands. Those would be sweat glands or sudoriferous glands producing sweat. Those would be oil glands, sebaceous glands producing oil. Most of the glands are made of many cells, but we also have goblet cells in epithelial parts of the body, and they are made of one cell only, goblet cells. They produce mucus. So, a lot of different types of cells. You need to remember also differences between endocrine and exocrine glands. Endocrine glands, here they are. Those are cell clusters that produce their secret into the nearby blood vessels. They do not have ducts, so their secrets are going straight into the blood and are called hormones. Exocrine glands have ducts. So it's like duct is like an exit out of the gland onto the surface, and it can be a surface of the skin or it can be a surface of some inner organs. For example, inside of the stomach there are glands producing hydrochloric acid or pepsin, and those products go through the ducts on the surface of the stomach, inner surface. So please know the difference between endocrine and exocrine glands. Hormones are secrets of endocrine glands, and those are called special chemical messengers in the body that are created in the endocrine glands, released to the blood, and through the blood they can go to pretty much all of our organs and tissues, and they can control most major bodily functions, like basic needs, hunger, to complex systems like reproduction. Hormones even can control our mood and emotions. And hormones act on the target cells. So, those cells that have receptors for a certain hormone and are specific for each hormone are called target cells. You also need to know the difference in endocrine system and nervous system. Why are we comparing the endocrine system with the nervous one? Because those are two organ systems that control our body, its functions. And nervous system is doing it through their neurons. So, nervous system uses nerves and electrical signals going through them to activate or to slow down different processes in the body, while endocrine system works by means of hormones, chemicals released into the blood, transported in the blood, and acting on specific organs and tissues, which we call target organs. Another difference that responses of the endocrine system occur more slowly. It takes time for the endocrine system to produce those hormones, but those effects, responses, last longer than those of the nervous system. Those are two major differences between endocrine system and nervous system actions on the body. But both of them coordinate and integrate activity of body, cells, organs, and tissues. You need to know locations of endocrine glands. Let's start from the very top. In our brain, we have two major glands. That would be pituitary gland, which is sitting right under hypothalamus. So we have thalamus, under it hypothalamus, and then this stalk called infundibulum connects hypothalamus with the pituitary gland. And also on the posterior part right here from thalamus we have pineal gland. Next one would be thyroid gland in the neck area. And on the back of the thyroid gland, on its posterior part, we have parathyroid glands, 4 of them. Next, there are adrenal glands. On the tops of the kidneys, pancreas, which is inferior to the stomach and posterior to it, and then testes in males and ovaries in females. There is also thymus, but we will talk about it when we discuss our immune system. So hormones are called long-distance chemical signals because they are produced in the blood and they travel through the blood or sometimes lymph. But they are not the only chemical messengers, not the only chemicals that coordinate the work of our cells. There are other types of chemical signalings. Autocrines. When a cell, here's a cell, produces some chemicals, and those chemicals act on the same cell, making some changes inside of it, those are called autocrines. Effects on the same cells. Paracrines. One cell produces chemicals, and they act on nearby cells, neighbor cells. Neither autocrines nor paracrines do not go to the blood and are not carried through the blood. That's why they are not hormones. They are just called local chemical messengers, and we do not consider them a part of the endocrine system. Types of hormones. There are 2 main types of hormones by structure. So right now we are talking about classification of hormones by their chemical structure. There are amino acid based hormones that are made of amino acids, kind like of a proteins. Here they are, example oxytocin. And then there are steroid hormones that have cholesterol in their structure. Remember those 4 cholesterol rings. Examples would be testosterone or progesterone. Before you continue, please stop this video and answer the questions for Chapter 17, Part 1.1. Questions are under the video. Let's talk about hormone action. What exactly hormones do when arrive to their target cells? First of all, if a cell doesn't have receptors for that specific hormone, then there will be no action on it. The hormone can do nothing to that cell. And cells that do have receptors for some specific hormone produced by the secreting cell in their gland, endocrine gland, those target cells their activity will be changed by the hormone when that hormone binds to the receptor. So what exactly hormones can do to their target cells? First of all, they can change membrane permeability by opening or closing ion channels. Right here in the cell membrane, there are a lot of channel proteins that can allow substances to go into or out of the cell. So hormones can either open or close those channels. Second, hormones can stimulate that cell to produce proteins or also to activate or deactivate enzymes. Remember, enzymes are chemicals that can speed up chemical reactions going on inside of the cell. It means hormones can either speed up by activating enzymes or slow down by deactivating enzymes the processes going on inside of that cell. Hormones also can induce secretory activity of the cell, and they even can stimulate mitosis. So they will make that cell to divide into 2 daughter cells. How exactly those hormones work with their target cells is called a mechanism of hormone action. And there are 2 types of mechanisms depending on the chemical structure of the hormone. if they are lipid-soluble or water-soluble hormones. Lipid-soluble hormones can enter the cell. They are lipid-soluble, so they can pass between those phospholipids, making the cell membrane and enter the cell. Those examples of those lipid-soluble hormones would be steroid and thyroid hormones. They enter the cell and act on intracellular receptors. Let's see how it works. The hormone, lipid-soluble hormone, was carried nearby the cell by the blood vessel. Hormone leaves the cell and it can enter the cell through the cell membrane, and it finds a receptor and forms receptor hormone complex. That complex can enter the cell nucleus through their nuclear pore, and it starts acting on a DNA of the cell, on a certain part of the DNA that is called gene. Remember that every gene is responsible for production of a certain protein by the cell. So, when hormone is acting on DNA, messenger RNA molecule will be produced. That messenger RNA molecule will exit the nucleus, again through the nuclear pore. It will find ribosomes in the cell cytoplasm. Those ribosomes will read the information from messenger RNA and produce some desired protein inside of the cell cytoplasm. Second type of hormones, which are called water-soluble hormones, example would be insulin. They all are amino acid based, made of amino acids like proteins, and they do not have ability to enter the target cells. So they act on plasma membrane receptors located inside of the cell membrane. So what they do exactly? Here is a hormone released by the blood vessel. It's going and acts on the receptor embedded into the cell membrane, and that binding causes G protein sitting right next to the receptor to be activated. G protein goes and activates structure called adenylyl cyclase, which in its turn activates CAMP molecule, and CAMP causes activation of a substance called protein kinase, and protein kinase phosphorylate proteins in the cytoplasm. What does that mean? Phosphorylation, it's getting energy from ATP molecule. ATP breaks away one phosphate group, turns into ADP molecule, and that phosphate group, which is energy, it allows some inactive protein to get activated and perform some certain function for the cell. Okay, there are some factors affecting those target cells' response, how they respond to hormones. First of all, as you already know, target cells must have specific receptors to certain hormones. And amount of those receptors will be different for the cells and for different hormones. Adrenocorticotropin hormone, or ACTH, receptors for that hormones can be found on certain cells only, and those certain cells are located inside of the adrenal cortex only. It means that ACTH hormone cannot act on any other organs but adrenal cortex cells. At the same time, another hormone, thyroxine, which is a hormone of the thyroid gland, receptors for that hormone can be found on nearly any and all cells of the body. So thyroid hormones can act on most of the cells of our body. Next one, hormones can influence the number of their receptors. So when hormone act on target cell, and that target cell develops more receptors in response to the hormone, it's called upregulation. Sometimes target cells can lose their receptors in response to the hormone, and it will be called downregulation. So changing of the target cell's receptors, their amount, can be either upregulation or downregulation. Regulation of the hormone secretion. The levels of hormones, blood levels of hormones, or the amount of hormones that are produced by certain endocrine glands usually is controlled by negative feedback loops. For example, our adrenal glands produce glucocorticoid hormones. To start producing glucocorticoid hormones, adrenal glands need to receive a signal, and that signal will be corticotropin releasing hormone produced in our hypothalamus. When there is too much of glucocorticoid hormones in the blood, then the level of those CRH hormone released by hypothalamus can be decreased. That is called negative feedback loop. The levels of hormones in the blood also can be regulated by different three things. Either by humoral stimulus. Humoral stimulus, it's when the level of certain chemicals in the blood can change of the level of a hormone, decrease or increase it. Example, right after you eat, especially when you eat carbs, blood glucose level goes high, and that causes release of insulin from the pancreas. The level of insulin increases. That would be example of a humoral stimulus. Neural stimulus. When somebody is scared, their sympathetic nervous system will release adrenaline or norepinephrine and epinephrine, and that would be example of neural stimulus. Finally, hormonal stimuli. One hormones can act on other endocrine glands and make them to increase the level of their hormones. For example, thyroid stimulating hormone produced by anterior pituitary gland through the blood goes to the thyroid gland and makes it to produce larger amount of thyroid hormone. Now, before you continue, please stop the video and answer the questions for part 1.2. The first gland we are talking about would be pituitary gland. Pituitary gland is located on the hypothalamus. Let's remember, we have a structure called thalamus, which is located in the very center of the brain between left and right hemispheres. Under the thalamus, anterior and inferior to it, we have a triangled area called hypothalamus. And hypothalamus, by this stalk called infundibulum, is connected to the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland is made of two lobes, anterior lobe and posterior lobe. That's anatomy. Now, physiology. Pituitary gland, both parts of it, produce pituitary hormones. For each hormone, first of all, you need to know where it originates from, what part of pituitary gland, its name, abbreviation, effect, and also for most of hormones you need to know target cells or target organs, and what happens in case if the level of hormone is too high or too low. So let's go through the hormone names. Growth hormone, prolactin, thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropin hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, antidiuretic hormone, and oxytocin. Posterior pituitary gland is made of neural tissue. Right up here in the hypothalamus, we have neurosecretory cells, cell bodies, and their extensions go through their infundibulum all the way to the posterior pituitary gland. So those cells produce oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone, and through the axons of those neurons, they go into posterior pituitary for storage. When our body needs oxytocin or ADH, those hormones will be released into the blood. Okay, that connection between hypothalamus and posterior pituitary gland is called hypothalamic hypophyseal tract, nerve tract, because right here there are bundles of axons, and it's located in the infundibulum. Why hypothalamo-hypophyseal? Well, hypothalamus, and another name for pituitary gland would be hypophysis. That's why it's called hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. Oxytocin is the first hormone that is produced in hypothalamus and stored in posterior pituitary. And the main function of oxytocin is helping with childbirth. It stimulates dilation of the cervix during the childbirth, and later it stimulates uterine contractions to push the fetal head towards the cervix. Oxytocin is also necessary for milk ejection while breastfeeding a baby. But remember, milk ejection, milk release, not milk production. There is another hormone responsible for milk production, and it's called prolactin. Oxytocin also contributes to bonding between people, between parent, newborn, and later child. And also it's involved in feelings of love, closeness, bonding between people, either it's a sexual or non-sexual relationship. Antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, also is released from posterior pituitary gland, and it helps to maintain blood pressure, blood volume, and tissue water content. How is it doing it? Target cells for antidiuretic hormone are located in the kidneys, in the tubules of the kidneys where urine is being produced. So, when antidiuretic hormone is released to the blood, it reduces amount of water produced by kidneys. So, the body produces less urine, but it becomes more concentrated, and water is conserved. The amount of water is increased in the body, and that increases blood volume and blood pressure. Before you continue, remember to answer the questions for part 1.3. Now let's talk about anterior pituitary gland. Anterior pituitary gland, right here, is connected with hypothalamus through a special structure that is called hypophyseal portal system. Pay attention, those are blood vessels. So what happens? Hypothalamus, right here, cells in hypothalamus, neurons, produce hormones, different hormones. Those hormones, through that blood, through that hypophyseal portal system, go into anterior pituitary and make anterior pituitary to produce its own hormones. Most of those hormones of hypothalamus stimulate anterior pituitary to make its own hormones, and only some inhibit hormone production in the anterior pituitary. And the total amount of hormones produced right here in the anterior pituitary would be 7. Here they are: growth hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, and prolactin. What you're supposed to know about each of them. I would highly recommend you to fill in the table, this table, and for each of those hormones, write down its name and abbreviation, target organs and tissues, its action or actions, what is it's doing to the target organs, how production of that hormone is regulated by hypothalamus, and gland of origin, if it's produced in anterior pituitary, or you can do the same for posterior pituitary. What happens in case of hypersecretion or hyposecretion of that hormone? Our first will be growth hormone, or GH. Its functions. Target organs are bones and skeletal muscle, and growth hormone stimulates their cells and promotes protein synthesis, so bones and skeletal muscles grow. In children, both; in adults, skeletal muscle. Also, growth hormone encourages use of fats for fuel, so it's working with liver and other body cells and tissues. Cells, our cells, take less glucose to use for energy, but use fat for fuel, and that elevates blood sugar level, anti-insulin effect of growth hormone. Growth hormone production is regulated by two hormones that are made in hypothalamus. Growth hormone releasing hormone, GHRH, and growth hormone inhibiting hormone, GHIH, or it's called somatostatin. So those two hormones are produced in hypothalamus, and through the hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system, they go to the anterior pituitary. Most common imbalances of growth hormone. If a kid is born and some condition, for example a tumor of a pituitary gland or hypothalamus, causes hyperproduction of growth hormone, it results in gigantism. Here it is, excessive growth. What happens in adults if tumor develops in adult? Bones cannot grow in length anymore, but they can grow in width. So bones of face, hands, and feet grow in width, and the face, hands, and feet get deformed. That condition is called acromegaly. In case of hypersecretion of growth hormone, it's especially dangerous if it happens in babies and children because they slow down or even stop growing, and that condition is called pituitary dwarfism, growth impairment. Nowadays, it's possible to help those children. They receive injections of growth hormone and they grow normally. Thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH or thyrotropin. It is a hormone produced by anterior pituitary gland, and here it is, anterior pituitary gland. And for its production, pituitary gland, anterior part of it, should receive substance from hypothalamus that is called thyrotropin releasing hormone. When pituitary gland receives it, it produces thyroid stimulating hormone into the blood, and through the blood it goes to the thyroid gland and stimulates the normal development and secretory activity of the thyroid gland. Which means if thyroid gland doesn't receive that thyroid stimulating hormone, then the level of thyroid hormones in the blood, T3 and T4, will be low, and it can cause condition called hypothyroidism. Adrenocorticotropic hormone. We have adrenal glands located on the tops of our kidneys. So that's a paired gland. There is a left and right adrenal glands. The outer layer of adrenal glands is called adrenal gland cortex, and that cortex produces several hormones, including corticosteroid hormones or corticosteroids. So, hypothalamus produces corticotropin-releasing hormone right here, and it goes to pituitary gland. Anterior part in answer, pituitary gland produces adrenocorticotropin hormone. Through the blood, it goes to adrenal gland cortex, and that cortex produces corticosteroid hormones. And sometimes the release of that CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone, from hypothalamus can be altered by different conditions like stress, hypoglycemia, or fever. Next one, follicle-stimulating and luteinizing hormones. Both of them are produced by anterior pituitary gland, but they have different functions. For example, follicle-stimulating hormone is responsible for maturation and production of eggs or ova in women and sperm cells in men. Luteinizing hormone is responsible for ovulation in women and also for production of female reproductive hormones, estrogens and progesterone. In details, we'll be talking about those two hormones when we discuss reproductive systems. Prolactin. That hormone is secreted by special cells, lactotrophs, in the anterior pituitary also, and it stimulates milk production, which is necessary for nursing the baby. When milk production is not necessary, when a woman is not nursing, then production of prolactin will be inhibited by prolactin inhibiting hormone from hypothalamus. Blood levels of prolactin increase during the pregnancy, especially at the end of pregnancy, and baby suckling stimulates prolactin release in their anterior pituitary gland. Here is a summary of pituitary hormones. You can find this table, picture 17.11. Please remember to answer questions for part 1.4.